You're ready with the invite. The Zoom link is there with you. As the clock ticks on, you face the ultimate dilemma which all of us face these days. Should you switch on your video or should you switch off the video? Welcome to yet another episode of What the Talk with Anu, and today we're going to discuss this very dilemma which is eating on everybody, irrespective of whether it is Generation Z or the millennials, to cam or not to cam. So stay with me all through the video to understand the pros and cons as well as the techniques to avoid this dilemma. Recently, I went through an article on LinkedIn, just very interesting. The article was about whether you should keep your camera on or off during a job interview. This dilemma is there for all the meetings that we attend, but today I'm going to address only this particular topic. Maybe some other day in another episode we'll talk about whether keeping your video on or off is a norm these days. To be exact, to start with, all the recruiters, I think about 90% of the recruiters expect you to switch your camera on. But then why is there a dilemma when recruiters want you to keep your camera on? Today, we're going to analyze this in depth, talk about the pros and cons, and then take a decision according to our situations. So let's go for the positive part of it as to why we should keep our cameras on. According to a survey, 93% of the recruiters expect you to keep your cameras on because when you switch on your camera, you bond with the recruiter and your facial expressions, your hand gestures, everything call for a kind of engagement and involvement which forms a part of your persona from where they will draw conclusions about your suitability and attitude towards work. Now, getting on with the particular aspect of your video being switched on during an interview, most people say that if you just have an audio, you will be free from bias, which most others also agree. But at the same time, let me tell you that the Mehrabian communication model considers that 93% of your communication is non-verbal. Going by this standard, the recruiter has every right to ask you to switch on the camera, and well, going by this model, beware that next time you go for a job interview, you better keep your camera on. Moving on, there is an article in the Journal of Communication which says that any kind of eye contact with the other person, even through a lens, gets you about 93% of communication and recognition. And this speaks in favor of keeping your video on during any such interviews where you're going to gain from it. For example, a job. The PMC article citation says that keeping your camera on gives you a kind of social presence, a kind of engagement and involvement which makes you to be recognized by your recruiter because you are one among so many people that he might have interviewed. These days, online Zoom meetings are conducted in order to save you from traveling all the distance to the offline engagement or interview, or making you comfortable wherever you are, cutting down on the travel costs and time. And when you switch on the camera, you actually are acknowledging that and respecting your recruiter as well, so that he can have a 100% review of your persona. Many people argue about this, saying that there are many ways in which recruiters might get affected by the technicalities of your video output and other things, which we will be discussing during our negative impact of keeping your camera off. Going on further, the third most important argument, which even I have faced as a recruiter, because I'm a part of the board of recruitments of many organizations and I do a lot of consultation in this regard, is always when you request for a camera off interview, it is red flagged as a proxy fraud, because many a time we all know that when the camera is off, anybody can pass on kind of solutions that you're looking for, or the interview would not be genuine because you might be referring to certain texts or any kind of information which you're not supposed to during the interview process. So the moment you say that you're not comfortable with a video on, maybe it's because of different reasons, but the recruiter reads it as not being transparent. So let's move on to the other arguments which are not in favor of keeping the camera on, or which support the individuals calling for a camera off interview. So much for all the arguments that support the camera being on during a recruitment process. But now let's move on to those people who support the camera being off. There are several reasons that they quote. For example, the University of Galloway, which has done an EEG test, proved that keeping the camera on might bring forth something called as self-objectification. Like when you repeatedly see your own image being flashed across the screen, there's a certain fatigue that sets into you, where 30% of your energy is oriented towards your own self. You're bothered about, your image, your hair, or how you're dressed, or the background that you have, that you don't give your 100% to what you're talking about. So they argue that if you keep the camera off, you will be 100% into what you're actually talking about, and that would make the hiring process a better thing. Also, a journal of British psychology says that there could be similarity bias in video on interviews. Like for example, a haircut or a home decor which is similar to yours. You like something like a mug that is being used by the candidate might even trigger off certain bias in the recruiter to recruit a person instead of actually concentrating on his suitability for a job. This is something which needs a lot of arguments and debates from the recruiters themselves. The third strong reason in favor of keeping your camera off during your recruitment process, as per the British Psychological Society, is the quality of the video. Most of the time, a poor video quality might make or break your job. This is a fact, because a person who can actually afford a better Wi-Fi and a better video quality would be considered as more productive, more able than a person with grainy video and bad audio quality, and this is a fact. This is the reason for which many people feel that if you keep your video off, you will not be concentrating on all these, and then will be concentrating on the exact question and the subject area which the recruiter will be working on. Now, apart from all these arguments, whether to cam or not to cam, how do you go about your interview process, and why should you keep your camera on or off? This is the argument that I wanted to bring forth in this episode of What the Talk with Dr. Anna. Now, what do I talk about this? Well, as a recruiter myself, I would always want to look at the person. The moment you look at a person, have an eye contact, even when it is online, is something which assures you that there's no fraud. There's transparency. You get engaged with the other person and get to know about his or her facial gestures, her hand movements, and know that there is a thinking, feeling, breathing person on the other side of the camera. There is a survey on Reddit which says that almost 100% of the hiring managers feel that a person can be recruited when the video is on in the first instance, when compared to a person without a video on. So it's a real choice that you have to keep your video on. I personally feel that you should keep your video on, but sometimes it becomes very difficult, probably because of the no signal zones, low signal zones. You might not be having the right kind of technological support in keeping your video on. Then in that case, I suggest that you start your interview with the camera on. Once the recruiter gets comfortable with you, you can always tell him that you have problems with the technical parts of it and keep your camera off. This is one way of doing it. The second thing, because we had been going through various arguments where we thought that the University of Galloway said that you will be, into self-objectification and all that. Many people experience what is called as a Zoom fatigue nowadays by looking at your reflection constantly. In that case, you switch off your own visual so that you don't see it, self-view, what we call, so that you are not disturbed about what's happening. People will be able to see you, but you won't be able to see yourself. So probably if you are that kind of a person who feels fatigued looking at yourself all the time, well, this could be one of the ways in which you can do it. Also, when a number of people are there on the interview panel and it becomes very difficult to maintain the kind of visual clarity and all that, you can keep your video off. At the same time, please understand that in this era, of technological development, it's important that the human element is preserved. I would always say that please go for a video on interview if you can. That is, please go for a camera that is on during your interview process, and you can request and switch it off in between if you feel that you're not technologically supported. This would call on for your authenticity, and the recruiter will be very comfortable once he or she is able to see you, understand you, and fathom you. Because at the end of the day, a recruitment process involves the complete identification of the human being along with his attitude, his physical appearance, as well as his knowledge and expertise. So I hope this episode of What the Talk with Dr. Anu gives you the right kind of food for thought in this regard. We'll meet again next time with many interesting topics. Till then, keep smiling.